bunch of school stuff sort of avalanche due to my own kind of time management problems. I think I left a few people hanging for a while. I think now everybody either has an answer from me and also from Geshe, or has an answer from me, but I'm waiting for an answer from Geshe. But if you wrote to me and didn't hear back, don't be afraid to ping me, and I will get to you as soon as I can. And obviously apologies for the long delay, but as the summer kind of in June, July, things should settle down a lot. I think that's all I wanted to share. Please grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, and I'll invite Geshe down and we'll get started. Thanks so much for joining us. Oh, thank you, Anna. It's it's been a good time. It's hard to juggle things sometimes. I mean, my main job is definitely translating for Geshe. That's kind of like my heart job, but the other things are interesting too. Yeah.
I think you're muted.
Yeah.
So let's try that again. Let's do a video check and an audio check. Is the video all right? You can see Geshe and myself. Okay, and you can hear my voice clearly?
Yeah, congratulations.
And you can hear Geshe voice clearly?
Sounds good.
All right. We are good to go then. Yeah. Geshe's like, did I ask you if it was working? I think I did. I think I saw a thumbs up. So I'm assuming we're good to go. If we're not, just, of course, let us know. Yeah, so Geshe said, you know, if anything comes up with the sound as we go along, just let us know, because of course he and I won't necessarily be aware, but we'll try to fix any problem as soon as it arises.
뭐야 다 치료 강가 다시 될래 강가 되네 다 야리야리로 시위를 같이 모였어.
So first of all, Tashi Dele to all Dharma friends, and Geshe hopes that your cultivation is getting better and better all the time.
어떤 안조 되네 때자 침보들 다 내가 요수스 자지기 소바다 가디나 같이 뭐.
And it's always important to recognize that the basis, the situation that we have right now, this is the very best basis for the cultivation of spiritual practice.
다 소싱이니 템보도 레레 가제 야보치는 로이나 다 가제 이나 버게 체 도원 로지 요바텔 당간조 잘라 조 니하네스.
And so from our side, if we are steady and if we are relaxed, we can definitely reach the higher levels of cultivation. But there's some points that we need to clarify here.
자 제슈들 생저 로지게 사와 사야지도 점망강가 로고와 사대대니 등간조 그게 신다고 조대니레스.
And so this relates to the basis, and this can be summed up in sort of two essential statements. The first of these is that the nature of our mind is pure luminosity. And the second of these is that the defilements or the stains are adventitious. That means that they can be removed.
대니 고로 신다고 들이 다 잘라 조지레스. 다 이나요 될래가 제가 때 늦지면아 고여도 더야 고가디요.
So this sort of fact of the pure luminosity and the adventitious defilements, right? These are characteristics shared by sentient beings. But if we don't have the basis, right, of our current rebirth, of our current circumstances, it's very hard to tap into and to cultivate that potential.
어다 메일리 메일레바티 다 데든디 네츠니 데다 요르치 또와 얘는 또 비야른 로마토 아기제 되니요.
If we tap into those potentials using the basis of our human form, our human body, and our human mind, there's actually no reason that we can't go further and further, get better and better in our practice.
다 로제고 다 레도 모아서는 만들는 뭐 지지하고 그러와서 로제세 치든 담만달래 그랬더니 대우 로도 하고 가네스.
And so, when we speak about this kind of nature, especially for maybe those of us who are beginners or less familiar, it's really important to understand what we mean by rangjin or nature.
생저 로제 요 예사와이 세 고로 로지 짐매 롱이님매 다 대지고 노야 그냥가요.
Because there's a danger of a mistake here. So we speak about the nature of the mind being pure luminosity. At the same time, this luminous mind does not exist naturally, does not exist inherently. This is an important point to be clear on. So there is a self, there is a person, there is an I, right? All of these things are kind of related to each other, synonymous, but it's important to understand the points related to this. Do you guys hear that construction noise outside? Okay, then I'll leave the window open. I have to close the window. Okay, as long as you can't hear it, we're good. So we say that there is a self, that there is a mind, that there is an I, but at the same time, we speak of a selflessness of persons, right? So when we speak of the nominally existent self and selflessness, it's important to be clear on the difference here. So to be able to sort of recognize and to tap into this pure luminosity of the mind that was mentioned, it's also important to be able to kind of recognize and relax into the mind's kind of natural aspect, which, as we spoke about, is fundamentally neutral. We could speak of it as being a kind of neutral equanimity.
하고서라 다 쳇대 콜레레 저 루그 버게 근데 노다면 레레 쳐서나 아니 갈래 가 개념지 바통하래서나 시고 통하고 노 월을 이렇게 노버티 시고 통통 그런 왔어.
So this kind of luminous nature of the mind, we could make an analogy to it as being like a precious jewel, right? So that's the kind of bare fundamental nature of our mind. But of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on, the adventitious stuff, which is kind of obscuring it. So you could think actually that it's like perhaps a lake or an ocean, at the bottom of which sits this precious jewel. If there is turbulence, all of the dust particles and all of perhaps the contamination and so forth that's in the lake or the ocean, this will be whirling around and you won't be able to see that jewel. But if there is stillness, those dust, those particles, those grains of sands, they will settle to the bottom and that beautiful jewel will be seen clearly.
다 텔타 가 침보 텔타 간도 시 도야겠지라 좀 돈보네라 그게 최근 놀라 개념이라고 되라 처음에비 초와도 노도 때리지까지 더 받죠 도마서야 내가서
So in this analogy, we could think of the particles of the contamination that's obscuring the water, preventing us from seeing the jewel. We could think of this as being projecting thoughts or false thinking, as I call namtok. Sometimes it's called projection. And we could also think of it as unpleasant feelings. These are examples of the things that obscure the nature of that mind.
아니 디스 디비네서지고 발까 저는 좀 맞이서 마고비려와도 또 빠르지고 다 네가지를 보겠는데 봐줘.
And also we could think of hanging on to regrets and so forth of the past and clinging to hopes and plans for the future. That blocks us from resting in the present. So those thoughts of the past and future, these can also be examples of those particles obscuring the nature of the mind.
다 디토르세 로지 코롤리마 테레테네 틴디그 네츠지 포게테즈 샤소나 강가 포게 리토바 통토야게 네츠지 셀 가르치 샤야지 바르시.
So the paradox here is that we talk about the fundamental mind or the mind's basic nature as being essentially neutral, like a neutral equanimity. But despite its neutrality, it has that power, that luminosity, to be able to reflect, to be able to comprehend any object of knowledge. In other words, anything that we wish to understand.
강가 리토케 통데키지 옌발라 코롤로 조타도 든디는 이도 든디는 이와시지 메바. 카도도 든디는 이와시는 저거 주사 메바.
But when we speak about also the mind's lack of natural existence, its lack of pinpointability, if you will, we understand that although the mind is luminous and although it has this power to reflect all objects of knowledge, at the same time, the mind has no shape. It has no color. It would be very difficult to point to a solid aspect.
다 몸보지가 든디그 네츠지라 그들 다 세로지게 사와 세가 니루미네 들어 다도 들어 손이 노노게 뭐 용기 알았어.
So some people, they tap into this equanimous, neutral nature of the mind and they think that, oh, I've realized the nature of the mind. I've tapped in to the mind's aspect of pure luminosity, right? So there is danger for misunderstanding here.
샤지스 오름보치도 다시 또 몸보지가 다른 베테 데데질 다 가지고 먹도 야레스. 샤지스 오름보치도 다 라마 몸보지가 디디가라 세 끝도 네츠지 뭐시 바래 마도 니룽인들 다는로요.
So Dzong Rinpoche and other important teachers, they have noted that there is a potential for misunderstanding, that when we sort of touch a little bit of this luminosity or touch some of this space of neutral equanimity, we can think, oh, I've realized the nature of the mind. I understand now the mind's final mode of abiding. But it's important to understand actually that at this point, it is still only the conventional mind that one has experienced, not the mind's ultimate nature.
다 든디지 자 오만주바노라야 그조 덴바 타스 제바돈 대도 덴바 타주 제바데 세니와 그조 덴바게 네스테 뭐 하고 타 델라 테네 테네 대도 데미네스 하고.
So this is why actually in the text Entering the Middle Way, the Majjhimavatara, it mentions that actually first we sort of familiarize, we cultivate an understanding of relative truths. And then after we have a fundamental understanding of relative truths, then we can presume to understand something about the ultimate.
딱 그저 되면서 때 토간 로야 긴장하고 돼. 토갈래야 됐더니 대도 되면서 돼.
We could think actually of relative or conventional truth as being like a stairway, and we can think of ultimate truth as the top landing or the top floor where the stairs end.
딘디그네서 니더라는 매 계산하고 있다 가리요.
So then if we are able to realize those two, then what is the profit? What is the benefit that we come to?
어빼는 가로서 그 땡비도 보때 맞췄는데 자비뽀그래 자비그네서 요도 대조하니다. 그게 신호가 질 거자가 배송왔어.
So we understand when we discussed a little bit about the story of the teacher of this world, the Buddha Shakyamuni. He was a prince, the son of a king, but he left all of that behind in order to abandon the palace to go into the forest to cultivate.
다 고자네 칠레네라 다 그렇게 빠바도 더 모티비깔 빠비 다 저런 것만 강가지 않은 로스마 다 저런 데 리본다고 가르쳐서.
So after a time, after he had cultivated and realized, he returned to the palace actually to meet his father, and his father basically said to him, like, essentially, you sort of shirked all of your responsibilities, right? You turned your back on all of your responsibilities. So what did you gain? Like, what did you learn from everything that you gave up?
당이 내서 tel내서 니시안디스 뎀바니사 다 대신나 다 대신이라 아니 다 대신 니가 다 되게 대신 얘네들 로토스 니마도 내서 니마도 시야만 되고.
So the Buddha is said to have explained to his father that actually, yes, from giving this up, there were only two essential things that I realized, the two truths of relative truth and ultimate truth. But from understanding these, I understood everything that needed to be known. And from understanding relative and ultimate truth, I was able to reach a pure and lasting happiness.
다 드니지 상하로서 계속 더 하고 살아왔어. 다 데려오러 왔어. 뎀바니라 때네 다 말이 바로 아빠 있는데 나는 다 딘디 있는데 차와 있는 강가 그렇게 좀 맞아야지.
So this is really important to understand that, this is the kind of object of attainment, is the perfect comprehension of these two truths, relative and ultimate. And through this, actually, all coarse and subtle phenomena can be completely understood.
어단에서 강강 안주 다 구하는 여반우지 소선 널 여반우지 통자서는 다른 말이 비게 될 같이 해서 매수 왔어.
When we're able to see the two truths, the relative and ultimate of any object that we gaze on, like anything in this room, we're able to understand those two truths about it, then actually there's no ground from which ignorance can sprout. We've essentially there's no more room wherein which ignorance can generate. So that's the introduction. Geshe said a little bit long maybe, but we just want to understand that actually this is the sound reasoning behind why we engage in the cultivation or the practice. Yeah. So, and then the next step is, in order to continue, we want to bring the body and the mind into a state of a peace, and we want to bring the four elements into equilibrium. I realized, I think I'm going to be asked how the sound settings are in a second, because I didn't change the sound settings. So just give me a moment. My apologies. Sorry about that. All right, after the chanting, again, Geshe said, is it okay now? I hope so. So many little things to remember. So yeah, I've put, so hopefully you'll be able to hear the chanting nicely, but if afterwards the sound is a little bit staticky or poppy, just let me know and we can put the setting back. And Geshe talked about settling the body and the mind and bringing the four elements into equilibrium. So it's important to understand that when we speak about those four elements like earth, fire, wind, water, that these exist in the external environment, but they're also components of all these elements within us. Internally. Listen. So we'll just take a moment to meditate before the chanting. Think just as a gentle breeze clears away the clouds obscuring the sun. In this way, I am settling the mind of any discursive thoughts. The inner four elements have come into equilibrium, and from this balance, then, the body and the mind also become peaceful and calm. So take a moment from this state of peace to reflect a little bit. What's that I that I experience like? What's that self that I experience like? And what is that body or physical form that I experience like? Think about the mind in its coarse and subtle aspects. Can we differentiate between those? Similarly, the self or the I, its coarse and subtle aspects. Similarly, our form, our body, its coarse and subtle aspects. What are the differences like? And so within the mind then, we've maybe differentiated a little bit between these coarse and subtle aspects. If we rest our attention in the mind a little bit longer, can we differentiate between aspects that are wholesome and unwholesome, or positive and negative? Think. It will become clear to me that although we spoke about the mind's fundamental nature as being a neutral equanimity, if each day I try to lead the mind to the cultivation of what is positive, to the cultivation of what is wholesome, correspondingly, I will experience greater mental peace and calm. If I can take this balance of the elements, the fundamental aspect of the mind, and mix that together with positive mental qualities like love and compassion, making them inseparable like milk and water mixed together, then it is clear that there can be a boundless, limitless mental happiness and peace. And in order to be able to bring forth those mental qualities effectively, I am going to make single-pointed praises and requests to the holy beings.
Chondende teje jeba da chomba yanda ba zobe sonje jeba dan shabsu demba dewa sheba jide jemba jebu dewe kalo jorwa lana meba ladon minangi demba sonje chondende pejawa shaja duwa la chase lo chedo kyabsu chi Temba chomdende teje jeba da chomba yanda ba zobe sonje jeba dan shabsu demba dewa sheba jide jemba jebu dewe kalo jorwa lana meba ladan minamgi temba songe chomdende pejawa shaja duba la chazelu cheda kyabsu chi
A short mandala. effigiam bodhicitta.
Sonje Jedon Zojo Jonala Jonju Badu Dani Gyatso Dagi Chenyin Gebe Sonanje Jola Penjir Sonje Joba Sonje Jedon Zojo Jonala Jonju Badu Dani Gyatso Dagi Chenyin Gebe Sonanje Jola Penjir Sonje Joba Sonje Jedon Zojo Jonala Jonju Badu Dani Gyatso Dagi Chenyin Gebe Sonanje Jola Penjir Sonje Joba
So let us continue.
오야 다 들이 좋았다는 간저 다 저기 디바서 호다 사가 돼 이디시 아튼 거 중이다 호다 들이 놀려 아레스.
So another thing that we should mention is that as we're practicing today, the holy month of Sagadawa Duchen has actually just begun. I think just a couple days ago.
호다 들이 다 루루소소가 다 개와 가세 제바 이나요 다 개와 노지다 노지도 만다 개와 지마도 마제바 이나요 두가나 왔잖아. 근데 사야 뭐도 야기다 녀서 요아레스.
So actually within the scriptures it says that during this holy month of Sagadawa that the wholesome or virtuous karma that we accumulate is greatly magnified. So for example, if we were to engage in one positive deed, this could be multiplied by 100,000 or even millions according to different scriptures.
호다 디누니더니 다 제바 제도 정하다 다 할래를 가더니 같이 못 요아레스.
And in particular, the eighth day of this holy month and the 15th day of this holy month are particularly powerful and significant.
호다 디디를 다 디야 디쇼서 좀 바래라 디세더라 레야겠네자.
Kebusum?
디체숨.
Oh, Duchensum. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and also we understand that Gonda Duchensum sen the Nima Chiki Namla Kewa Danzong. Yeah, so there are the three. It's actually Sagadawa is the combination in a way of three great festivals because the most important day of Sagadawa is actually the celebration of the Buddha's holy birth, his holy enlightenment, as well as his parinirvana or passing away. So all three of these are celebrated on one occasion. So feel that especially during this holy time that we're very fortunate to be able to practice. So because ngaksane dene yigi dewa chi. Yeah. So corresponding with this special Sagadawa month, Geshe would like to propose that we recite the mantra of Buddha Shakyamuni, Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muniye Soha, together. Lama said the Lama said. So we'll do it first audibly and then it will be a mental recitation. So we can think about our mind as a little bit like a mischievous or tricky monkey, and we can think of a mantra as being like a stake or a post that we bring the monkey to with a rope so that it stays in one place. And actually, when we speak about the mental recitation of a mantra, it's not just a mere recitation like when we do verbally, but when we do the mental recitation, it's an accumulation of the mantra as well as a deep meditation. So if when we do this mental recitation of this mantra, any sort of unskillful or unwholesome minds that arise, that we don't follow them, we just allow our mind to stay focused on the mantra and let those unskillful minds pass away, right? This is very useful for creating that mental peace. So as a preliminary, we'll just take a moment to adjust our body and mind to make them peaceful. So, as best you can, imagine that in the space in front of you, slightly elevated, is our teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni. And think that as we engage in this practice, together with us are all 6 types of sentient beings, but in human form, also wishing to cultivate. And the Buddha is pleased with all of us. And we can also imagine that as we continue with the recitation of the mantra, lights and nectars emanate from the heart of Buddha Shakyamuni, and that these descend and bless all of the assembled sentient beings, including ourselves. So now mental recitation. Think from the rain of holy lights and nectar falling upon us, all obscurations, all stains of body and mind are completely purified or cleared away. And then think that as the Buddha is the teacher and the source of refuge, I will go for refuge to Buddha with single-pointed devotion. And think that in order to be able to lead all of these sentient beings to ultimate happiness just as Buddha intended, I must myself realize the same enlightenment that Buddha realized to bring forth bodhicitta. With this aspiration of bodhicitta, think that in terms of liberation, in terms of realizing bodhicitta, in terms of reaching complete enlightenment, I have all of the conditions necessary to be able to do that right now.
So the mental recitation of mantras is actually, it's a significant practice, and you'll find mental recitations described in many different sadhanas or deity practice manuals. Yeah, so this is also a little bit of training for that. Gonda di gendi nakti nanso samsam om muni muni maha muni so athayata om muni muni maha muni so alagire di niga digro. Yeah, so I was just mentioning to Geshe because I know that people we always want to be correct in how we do things, right? So sometimes you see this Shakyamuni mantra as Thayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. Sometimes you see it as Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha. Both are acceptable, actually. I just checked with Geshe. Yeah. So Thayata is like, it's a little bit like saying it is like that. It's like an ornament at the head of the mantra that one can add. And so now we must turn to our text, which is a complete and especially unmistaken guide to the unmistaken path. So we will turn So we're beginning, because it is the source of all the Lam Rim texts, including the one by the Great Fifth. We're actually going to begin our discussion today on the lamp for the path to enlightenment by Atiśa Dipamkara. So that's where we'll start today.
Jagaketo Bodha Pada Tando Popeketo Shonju Loja Dema, Shonju Sembanjoba Jena Jabala Shansa Lo, Tetse, Shani, Teres.
So we'll begin with the title and also the brief homage or prostration. So in the language of India, Bodhipathapradīpam. In the language of Tibet, Jangshub Lamgi Trima. So that's the lamp for the path to enlightenment. Homage to the youthful Bodhisattva Mañjuśrī.
This one, oh yeah, that individual. That is a Java, this one. This is Java Tato, this is a Yondoka, this is Java Toche, this is Java Toche Tato, teach it on Gendonola, Kipachi Bishashi, that changes.
And so next is the expression of worship, and this actually begins in the verse numbered 1. In the, I think we sent to everybody, hopefully you have the Lotsawa House translation. That's the one I'm using. With great reverence I prostrate to all the victorious ones of the 3 times, to their Dharma, and to the members of the Sangha. And so this expression of worship is essentially a verse of homage or prostration to all 3 jewels. So in terms of the expression of worship, actually, the homage can be expressed to different objects of worship. So sometimes you'll see a homage to the omniscient one, which is a homage to the teacher, the Buddha. Sometimes, as here, you'll see the homage to the 3 jewels, to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then, for example, sometimes Ningje Chempola Chagselo di Umala Jupara. And in other texts like the Entering the Middle Way or Madhyamaggavatara, you'll see I prostrate to great compassion. So the author can use different objects of homage. And in terms of the verse of homage or prostration being at the beginning of the text, this is also so that the author, right, who is a holy being, so that the author can clear away any obstacles to being able to complete the text. And when one thinks about this, when one thinks especially of the verse that says one who is endowed with great merit can have their aims accomplished exactly as they wish, this should make us kind of very confident and happy to engage with what is wholesome. If we develop a habituation of liking virtue, an appreciation of the taste of virtue or what is wholesome, even if we just have one day left in this world, we can make it something worthwhile.
This one. 토용 그러was.
And so then in terms of the three jewels, we also mentioned that the main of those is the Dharma jewel. And it's also important to understand that actually individually through our own study and practice, we can come to actualize the Dharma jewel ourselves.
지게조 토서나 똥만이 에서트 가디 도서나 지게조 토바래. 단다 대체 되면 세이나지 바레스.
So one may ask, well, when does the individual actualize this Dharma jewel? At what point in their practice? We would say that the individual actualizes this Dharma jewel once they have that direct realization of emptiness. And the Dharma jewel being actualized at that point is actually something that's shared in common with the various vehicles, whether we talk about the Mahayana or whether we talk about the Theravada and so forth.
제만 논적 로베 쇼노도 빠디치라 가르스 바레서는 거의 타마요아레. 거의 타마 가딘 것주 바레서나 동반이 다 남행에서도 가디 도서나 동반행에서도 도서나 거의 타만 것주 바레.
So in the teachings on Pramana and the Pramanavartaka and so forth by Dharmakirti and so forth, we find that it says that that which is called samsara is posited as beginningless, however it does have an end. That end of samsara is when the Dharma jewel is realized or actualized.
사베 메이치에서나 사베가 타만다고 디디쳐요. 그쵸 봐요. 대노지 거의 타마데 남행에서도 도서나 거의 타마 단 것주 바레.
So it just like we could say that the potential of a seed to bring forth a sprout is exhausted when that seed is scorched or burned in a fire. Similarly, then the end of samsara, the end of compelled rebirth due to karma and affliction, is experienced by the individual when selflessness is realized.
여러 준유가 눈에 투메 말이 봐서 되게 다 내가 제만 도기 차로.
Yeah. So if we think about those 12 links of dependent origination, sometimes we say that the head of those 12 is ignorance. So once you take ignorance out of the picture, right, samsara can no longer perpetuate.
동반행에서도 또 들어가는 게 말이 봐. 배도 매가 차야 말이 되네. 이나에 된다. 여러 진이가 노세 말이 빌 노지 다 레두자들이 또 침보 싸움도 기차사.
So after the initial direct realization of emptiness, it's said that to its subtlest aspects, the ignorance may not be completely eradicated, but whatever remains, it is certainly not a powerful enough ignorance to be able to compel the accumulation of the karma which perpetuates rebirth.
다 대전주 세던 데서나 제가 전에 보면 전주 세던 데서나 동반행에서도 또 연구를 왔어. 아니 대체 전주 좀 봐봐. 대체 봐봐서 대체 봐봐왔어.
So when one has this direct realization of emptiness infused with bodhicitta, then one becomes a Mahayana Arya, an Arya Bodhisattva of the Mahayana path.
다 디딜렉트는 개선다고 지엘라만도 가라 파비 가도 나와도 치 등화자네 뽕 세시와도 가와도 나와도 저와 강가 되는 거의 된 과도 요아랬더니 강이요 말이야.
And so in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the text of the Sublime Continuum, it explains that once this Mahayana Arya, what do we call this? This Mahayana Arya state has been actualized. One is no longer beholden to the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and ordinary death. So at that point, one has achieved a great liberation or a great freedom. So one may ask then, okay, we talked about this Dharma jewel being actualized, but at what point is the Sangha jewel actualized? One actualized or becomes the Sangha jewel, and this is of course in the ultimate sense, once that just follows that realization or actualization of the Dharma jewel. Gonda di chukunjuk tobne dene di hoptekala. So once that Dharma jewel is actualized, in that same instance, that same moment, the person who is realizing that, they become an actual Sangha jewel. And then once the practitioner is able to bring their meditation on emptiness infused by bodhicittas to the point where they can see the two truths simultaneously in one object without differentiation mixed together. At that point, sorry, I want to stick precisely to his words here because I don't want to confuse you. So when you can see the two truths of one object in one moment, as clearly as Geshe can see the little plant that is sitting on his table, at that moment, right, the Buddha jewel is actualized, it is achieved. And actually this presentation holds for both the sutra and tantra paths. So this is a prostration to the three jewels, but we also understand that as we come to the end of the path, actually the three jewels are objects of attainment, right? They're things that we will actualize. And then at that moment too, right, we also become a source of refuge for other sentient beings. We're actually capable of providing them refuge or protection. And so we can understand, right, when we offer this homage to the three jewels, that refuge to the three jewels can be refuge to the causal three jewels. It can also be refuge to the resultant three jewels, which we just discussed. So the next two lines are the oath to compose, urged by my good student Jangchub, I shall elucidate the lamp for the path to enlightenment. So Jangchub was not just a good student, but an exceptional student, and actually this is in the histories it's explained very extensively. And actually when you understand the story behind this text and behind this teacher and a student, it's really something that could like touch your heart and bring tears to your eyes actually. So it is said that the brother of Jangchub actually he gave up his life to really be able to secure Atiśa's arrival in the land of Tibet. So I shall elucidate the lamp for the path to enlightenment, so we can understand elucidate as, you know, that path which is so clear in his mind, he's going to compose and explain to us. Now, so that includes, so we've gone through the homage and the oath to compose, and now in verse number 2 we come to the actual text. Understand that there are three types of individuals: lesser, middling, and superior. And so here we also speak of the types of individuals as we can speak of scopes. So we can speak of the small scope correspondingly, the middle scope, and the great scope. So self, I, and individual, in some contexts they are considered to have different names, but one essential meaning. But here person, or you could also translate this as being or individual, we're speaking of them as like more individual propensities, right? Propensities or capacities. So if we can understand, right, the teachings that correspond to the lesser capacity, the middling capacity, and the superior capacity, this is really going to, in the future, help us to contextualize any teaching, really. So I shall set out a system of classification in which their respective characteristics are made completely clear. So Atiśa here really promising that he will define actually what these are for us. So the verse number 3, and this is about the lesser or the small scope. Know that those who, by whatever means, exclusively seek mere mundane pleasures of samsara for their own benefit are inferior individuals. So the person who's thinking, they have an awareness of cause and effect, and they're thinking, oh, I don't really want to fall into the lower states of existence, because if I do, it could be hard to get out, and there will be great problems. So therefore, I will not just follow samsaric happiness, but I will try to, within samsara, create the causes to reach the higher realms of humans and gods, or humans and celestial beings. So for those of us who claim to practice the great scope, we should understand that a favorable rebirth in the human or celestial realm is also an object of attainment for us. However, it is not the principal or main object of attainment that we dedicate ourselves to. So when we say a person of lesser capacity, right, the person of lesser capacity is the one who is thinking only to secure that favorable rebirth within samsara for himself or herself. Those who have turned their backs on samsara's pleasures and refrain from sinful karma, striving merely for pacification for themselves alone, such individuals are said to be middling. Yeah. So we understand that within samsara, even if we reach the peak of samsara in terms of a beneficial rebirth with a good reputation and so forth, right, at the end of that rebirth within samsara, there can only come difficulty, because there's that aspect of it being under the control of ledang nyumong ola yin sanjwa. There is that aspect of it being under the control or perpetuated by karma and affliction. So a young man came to take refuge a couple of days ago, and when Geshe gives the refuge ceremony, part of that ceremony is always an explanation of how within samsara, the nature of samsara is not something that has any essence. It's not something that can bring lasting benefit. When one has a deep comprehension of the faults of samsara and thinks that, as long as I remain within samsara, there can be no true freedom or true happiness. Therefore, it's not acceptable if I remain within samsara. I must absolutely get out of samsara. This mind striving to liberation, this is what delineates the practitioner of the middling capacity.
Lama Tsongkhapa
So in the Lam Rim, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, Lama Tsongkhapa laments that actually because of our mindset, even when we accumulate wholesome, virtuous karma or causes, those virtuous causes even, they act as causes to perpetuate the cycling within samsara. So these shlokas or verses, they're just very short, a few words, but if we really contemplate them, we can see that there are many deep meanings embedded within. One of the main reasons that Buddha Shakyamuni came into the world relates to this third type of suffering, which is the all-pervasive or compounded suffering. One of the main reasons that the Buddha came to this world is so that people could see that all-pervasive compounded suffering as a fault, not as something desirable. The first type of suffering, the suffering of suffering, that's those immediate unpleasant feelings, pain and so forth. This is immediately evident to us that it's not something desirable, right? So that the suffering of suffering doesn't need to be taught on extensively. And in terms of the suffering of change, right, that impermanence, the suffering of change, this was explained before the time of the Buddha in the land of India by, wise beings of other traditions. So the Buddha didn't need to come specifically to teach the suffering of change. And so the Buddha, before his enlightenment, he practiced the religious, the spiritual disciplines that were accessible in the land of India at that time. But actually seeing that it couldn't completely solve the problem of suffering, especially the suffering beyond the suffering of change, he said, there's something more that I need to try to understand, something more that I need to go for here. The Buddha saw through his own cultivation that if one put effort into trying to rid oneself of the suffering and the suffering of change, that was a little bit like just taking the leaves or the branches off a tree. As long as the trunk and the roots still remained, the problems could again manifest. The source of the suffering and the suffering of change can be understood to be this all-compounded pervasive suffering. Until the trunk and the root of the all-compounded pervasive suffering is completely eradicated, then the suffering and the suffering of change cannot be securely eliminated either. If we manage to get rid of this all-compounded or pervasive suffering, right, then we can understand that based upon removing that, then suffering and suffering of change will also naturally be eliminated. And in order to completely eradicate that compounded or all-pervasive suffering, if we really want to do that, there's really no choice but to realize selflessness. However, the realization of selflessness is something that is profound, not easy to comprehend. In fact, it is because of the complexity of selflessness that initially after his enlightenment, the Buddha said, I have discovered this amrit, right, this nectar-like dharma, but there are no disciples suitable yet to receive it.
She was so she was
Sumba. Oh yeah, sorry. So Shiroka Napare. So Geshe said the third one, and I was like, aren't we on the fifth verse? He's like, the third capacity, silly, not the third verse. So we are on verse number 5, but it is, of course, the third capacity. Those who truly desire to completely eradicate all the suffering of others through their own personal suffering, such individuals are supreme. So first, in this instance, one has understood one's own difficulty or problem within samsara. But here one goes beyond that and one thinks, well, it's not just me, right? Other sentient beings experience that same problem or difficulty as well. So the one who thinks that I must get rid of that nature of suffering and the causes of that suffering, not just for myself, but for other sentient beings as well. The individual who has this type of goal or thought is that supreme capacity individual. And so the topic, or we could say the juja, is like, in Tibetan, it's like literally like the object to be elucidated or the object to be explained. We can see here from these 3 verses that actually what's going to be explained is the paths of the small, middling, and great or superior capacities. And also, it's an opportunity for us to reflect not just the words that we utter about how fantastic our practice is, but where in our mind, if we look really deeply within our mind and we reflect, like, where am I actually? Like, what does my aspiration actually match up to in terms of these 3 capacities? So the holy beings often say, like, there's no doubt as to what is being practiced is the Mahayana Dharma. But what we have to do is ensure that the speaker of the Dharma and the practitioner of the Dharma are truly imbued with a Mahayana intention. Yeah, so this motivation is something that's really important, like when we engage in the practice of the Dharma, to examine, but it's really important to be aware of our motives actually in our other activities of life as well. So then now we will switch to the sacred words of Mañjuśrī text. So, in terms of where we left off in the English edition, I believe that we are on page 2, and we are just above that last paragraph beginning alternatively. So actually, in this particular part, it's explaining the various verses of homage. So we've actually explained the most important praise or homage that is contained within the text, which is the praise and homage of the Buddha. And within that praise and homage of the Buddha, there are many deep meanings that could be understood, actually. So, to sum up, the 5th Dalai Lama praises the Buddha on his completion of the 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom, on his training in the practices of method and wisdom to perfection, which brought forth the resultant state through which one's own welfare is achieved, the truth body or dharmakaya, and the resultant state through which one can work for the welfare of others, which is the form body or the rupakaya.
This one, or that the Dichi, that's when you said that the Japanese of Momo Gelatin and Yoba, that Toya about it, I should.
So what we want to understand from this verse is that a Buddha comes forth, right, is the cumulative result of many perfectly accumulated causes.
Don't know Jinning out to catch a motion, Bani, Lord Tashin, Jivukini, Selgiona, Masechi, and you know, Yaponoya.
So we can understand the kind of rubric of three. What did I say? Did I say rubric? I meant rubric. The rubric of three sets of two, which is the basis, the two truths, relative and ultimate, the path of method and wisdom, and the result of the two bodies, the rupakaya, the form body, and the dharmakaya, the truth body. And if we have this in our mind as kind of that rubric, then we want to be able to, continue to work on achieving those from birth to birth, happily until enlightenment. So, although we may not have achieved the Rupakaya and the Dharmakaya ourselves in this moment, if we engage in the practices aimed at achieving the Dharmakaya, through which one's own welfare is achieved, we're actually going to simultaneously be creating causes to be happier, more and more peaceful in our daily lives. As we strive to accumulate the causes of the Rupakaya, the form body, through which one achieves the welfare of others, although we may not have actualized that form body yet, merely accumulating its causes is going to make sure that our relationships with others are wholesome, that we are not harming them, not doing violence, and so forth. So we see that method and wisdom, these are practices that bring forth this great result, but also we can see in our own lives, in our own daily experiences, that they definitely bring forth those smaller types of happiness. Because if they can bring forth those great results, they can definitely bring forth those smaller happinesses as well. And, in order for all of that to come along, then we also want to be able to understand the way things really are, their relative and ultimate modes of abiding, right? And to be able to understand that, we want the basis, right? So the method and wisdom are the path. We want what comes before that, the basis, the comprehension of the two truths, relative and ultimate. So great meanings embedded within that verse for us to understand. Okay, so we are going to So we are going to skip ahead now to page 8 within the text, which is the verse of homage to Nagarjuna and Asanga. Yeah, so Geshe said, because we're not rushed, but we do want to make sure that we're able to complete the sacred words of Mañjuśrī. The way that we're going to proceed is we're going to make sure we cover all the words of the root text, and then the sort of highlights of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's commentary. We'll give that as well, but we might not give the entirety of that.
사지 치츠께서 멤비 초 시체 치체 좀비 리바진 대게 시타침보 노니시 다가 스피콜레 가테고스.
So we are continuing with the praise of those two trailblazers, Nagarjuna and Asanga. So at the top of page 8 in the English text, I praise those known as the two great trailblazers, the renowned ones who transcended the domain of existence, skilled in lifting up the vast and profound Dharma on the back of the turtle of explanation, debate, and composition when it sank into the inferior ocean of the world. So when we speak of the Buddha's doctrine, we understand that this can be divided into 4 schools of philosophy, right? The 4 types of tenets.
다 뒤눈에 되는데 그 원화 대체도 태면이 여식이나.
And we also understand that it can be divided into the Mahayana and the Hinayana, the universal vehicle and the vehicle of individual liberation.
다 되는서 여식이 되려 변하셔라만 이시대 손제 아니 너데비 시대 손제 세미요만에 세좀비 시대 손제 아마비 시대 손제 뭐지미 다게 하레스.
디 야보
시대 손제 시다. 시대 손제 세그러와.
Ale shinta singja soje. Ale shinta soje.
도는 게 벌러더니라.
Right. Shinta soje kawa lagyo maredang lagyore.
파파 토메도 게 벌러더니 시대 손제 세미 다게 하레스.
Yeah. So then from this verse, one word should stick out to you here, which is the Shinta Sulche, or the Shinta Chempo. So this is trailblazers. The word trailblazers here is being assigned to these two great scholars, Nagarjuna and Asanga.
파파 토메데 세좀비 시대 손제. 그러 이제 아마 바레스. 이나 이걸 그 세좀비 시대 손제레스.
So Asanga is known as the trailblazer, or the opener of the chariot way of the Chittamantrin, or mind-only school of Buddhist tenets. Although his realization was said to be that of the middle way, it is said that primarily he expounded the mind-only school. And Nagarjuna is the trailblazer, or the opener of the chariot way of the middle way, the Madhyamaka schools of tenets.
다 시다 손제에서 근데 들고 수면 되었어. 배나 시다 첨부 지 그런가 괜찮지는 반 콘도타스나.
Yeah.
다 시다 연다를 지 강가 되는 반도는 걸 해라고 저러요.
So this is why, now you'll see why I didn't say trailblazer. Well, I said trailblazer, but I said opener of the chariot way. So opener of the chariot way, Shinta Soje actually literally translates as the opener of the chariot way. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, So His Holiness the Dalai Lama explains that if you think about a path that a great chariot is making or opening up, if a very large chariot opens up that path, then all of the other smaller chariots can follow. So that's how those scholars are being compared here. So opener of the chariot way means kind of opening a new way of thinking or a new way of doing so that others can also follow. That's what we can understand from that. So one might ask, okay, well, we talk about these four schools of tenets, and certainly the two initial schools of the Vaibhasikas and the Sautantrikas, they're also very significant, but those who kind of opened up or propounded those two schools, they are not known as openers of the chariot way or trailblazers, but we call Nagarjuna and Asanga trailblazers, those of the middle way and mind-only schools. Why is that so? Yeah, when the Buddha first came into the world, his doctrine and his doctrine and his activities shone like the sun equally on all sentient beings. Yeah. But after the Buddha manifested the passing away, a lot of time passed. And in particular, there arose kind of confusion and disputes, and the sun of the Mahayana teachings degenerated. It was in danger of setting. So because the Hinayana Dharma, the vehicle of individual liberation, and the associated philosophies of the Vaibhasikas and Sautantrikas had not degenerated, were not in danger of setting, then those who were propounding those philosophies didn't need to newly open paths. So they are not called openers of the chariot way or trailblazers. However, this was very different than the task of Asanga and Nagarjuna, who, when something had nearly set, had to revigorate it had to reinvigorate it and open up those paths again. And so actually the role of Asanga and Maitreya is so important that they're spoken about actually within kind of, I guess, don't want to use this word, but I think prophecy is the best word that I could find. Prophecies within the sutras saying, 400 years after the time of the Buddha will come a great scholar, 900 years after the time will come a great scholar. So they were foretold, actually.
This one, oh, that and is at the end, penny, tap, meva, chato, chaya, tape, you got chivo in Bekal Coronia.
So they're openers of the chariot ways. They are trailblazers because Nagarjuna and the Sangha, they appeared at times where the sun of the Mahayana teachings was in danger of setting, and they again open up those Mahayana paths so that others would be able to follow. Hence we call them openers of the chariot way or trailblazers. And you might have noticed, skilled in lifting up the vast and profound Dharma on the back of the turtle of explanation. So the mention of this turtle of explanation actually takes us back to Vedic mythology, or I guess the Vedic teachings, right? Which was at a time where the 4 continents had sort of come together and the earth was beginning to disintegrate and it was in danger of, I guess, falling into a great ocean. Vishnu, in the form of a great turtle, he arose to the surface and kind of saved the world from that destruction. So that is the analogy. It's that analogy from the Vedic tradition of Vishnu as the turtle saving the world. So Geshe said, he's not an expert in the Vedic teachings. He can't say whether this truly happened or not, but in the Vedic scriptures, it describes a little bit like that. You can look in, I think this is in Srimad Bhagavatam. Youngest one? The other thing that we need to consider here is that in terms of the Mahayana Dharma that was propounded or spoken, right, it's many, many thousands of teachings actually. And so within those teachings, there may appear to be contradictions. For example, some sutras may be proclaiming that things actually do exist, and other sutras are proclaiming that nothing truly exists or exists inherently at all. So, as this kind of time of degeneration happened or confusion arose, we could say that there came a period where beings didn't know at all which sutras were definitive and which sutras required interpretation. So because not understanding what was definitive and what required interpretation, there was a lot of confusion about how to practice. But actually, due to the kindness of Asanga and Nagarjuna coming into this world, they laid out a very clear differentiation. So now we will know perfectly which sutras can be accepted as definitive and which sutras require interpretation, right? This has now been all clarified for us. So we're offering prostration to the protector Nagarjuna and Venerable Asanga, understanding that they reinvigorated, they clarified the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni in general, and in particular the Mahayana Dharma, and for that reason we offer them respect and homage. And so, in terms of this explanation of the stages of the path to be cultivated by beings of three capacities, we can see that there are teachings within the sutras that kind of go in this direction or that hint at this.
But
these teachings of beings of the three capacities, in terms of putting it into a clear formula, making it easy for beings to study and practice, this is due to the kindness of Atiśa, which is why he is mentioned next. So if you're following the text, we're on page 9.
Koi konja salivin de koi konja rai sde jon techi chichi nyama ke wochi loto mamba seton lechi ba tete noi chanje Atiśa
So don't allow it again, Consuela.
oh so la garse so
Geshe is saying I'm taking too long to tell you what page it's on. I just so that those who have the text can follow. So we're on page 9. It's the bold text. Joje Atiśa, in the cool land surrounded by snow mountains, Atiśa dispelled the darkness of wrong views with the bright sun of Mahayana Dharma, simultaneously permeating Tibet with the light of the subduer's teachings.
Oh, that day on the net, and do not that pay should you want to watch Larten and attend to Georgia by the other Shatic Pelly in I so what you did, the body touchy and by the mind by time, Mada, ya, Lupa. So in
this way, Atiśa, similar to the previous figures, actually, in that at the time that he came to Tibet, there were some wrong views permeating, and it was difficult because of the confusion of that period for some people to be able to differentiate between what was Dharma and what was not Dharma, and so his kindness was really in clarifying that for sentient beings, clarifying those wrong views. So pointing to what was mistaken that was present, and also pointing to what was unmistaken that was present in the land of Tibet, he was able to restore the brilliance of the sun of the Buddha's teachings, and once again those could permeate that land, so he is praised in this way. And then after this praise to Atiśa, we come to his disciples, and as we go down to other contemporary masters of the teachings. So on page 10, we come to the next verse of praise, which is to Drumtun Gyalwe Jungne, Drumtunpa. How wondrous this Kadam tradition that pervades all directions, whose excellent teachings are the supreme wish-fulfilling jewel, that, placed at the pinnacle of the victory banner of listening, contemplation, and meditation, fulfills ultimate aspirations. Yeah, so of course, during the time, this time in Tibet, we said that there was some confusion. There were some good teachers, but there were also some not so good teachers not teaching correctly. So Drumtunpa, during this difficult period, he kind of really helped to bring forth a clear understanding of his teachers' teachings. Fulfilling aspirations. So really, Drumtunpa he had many different teachers, but seeing Atiśa as his main teacher, as his main inspiration, and really trying to closely follow that path, they worked together to restore the teachings in Tibet. Younger than that? So Drumtunpa. Ale, loso. Yeah. Yeah. Ale. Yeah.
So Taiwan Gamachin Tino
So
Hakusong.
so yeah, Hakusong. So Geshe said, actually, Drumtumpa and Atiśa, they would come to different monasteries and try to find good places of practice. But if that practice did not come out well, they would leave that place. Geshe was teasing me about I was myself in a monastery in Taiwan where I didn't really like the style of practice, so he left. So he's like you, they just decided to leave, right? So they left. What they found was not beneficial for them. So something to be understood here as well. So we also really want to understand that Atiśa and Drumtumpa, they really kind of struggled, right? Not everything unfolded easily, and it was only through kind of their determination and their steady effort that they were able to bring forth the son of the teachings. So we are going to end here on page 12, and we are ending with the praise to Lama Tsongkhapa. So I will read that praise. Through merely raising the vast 100-spoked Vajra of your finely analytical intelligence, you destroy the mountains of faulty explanations of countless treatises by the stained and confused, while simultaneously defeating all subtle-bodied arrogant asuras, malicious antagonists, nascent in the womb. May the omniscient Tsongkhapa, the unprecedented Devendra, learned righteousness and good reign.
So
there are lots of things that are shared here, but the main image that comes forth, and I really have to say that I think Sophie, who translated this, did such an incredible job, actually. But the main image that comes forth that we're comparing Tsongkhapa to is this vast 100-spoked Vajra, Dorjedi, right? So this 100-spoked Vajra of analytical intelligence, the 100-spoked Vajra is actually said to be a real object that is kind of imbued with prayer and very powerful. And when there are problems in the God realm or in the demigod realm or between the suras and the asuras, this can be kind of thrown. And it when that Vajra is thrown into those realms, it completely dispels the unpleasant sounds of disputes.
Lama Tsongkhapa pegi shola ta tambori le tumba tenju tumbi chola ndo ya te netsete ti sabo chi tapet chen meba ji za akasara tambori le tane ko songa chen ja ja ma to si wazim mandu has.
So we look at Tsongkhapa and when he presented his teachings, and he was very skillful. So when Tsongkhapa began teaching in Tibet, actually, in terms of interdependence underpinning emptiness and emptiness underpinning interdependence, this was not widely propagated or understood, so Tsongkhapa didn't insist on this right away.
So if
we look at Tsongkhapa's collected works, we understand that he had this understanding of the union of emptiness and interdependence, or emptiness and dependent arising, but it doesn't feature heavily in his early works because the time was not yet right.
But at the
same time, this was one of the essential aspects, like an essential aspect of the Buddha's teachings. Dependent arising underpins emptiness. Emptiness underpins or assists dependent arising. So, but it wasn't mentioned right away.
But Lama
Tsongkhapa, he kind of opened the chariot way of understanding the relationship between dependent arising and emptiness, and this understanding that they are inseparable. Geshe said, there are other opinions, and his is not the only opinion, but he did clarify and present this path.
Then la courage chorus of duty duna watching to us, Pugishia to go, Kangata, what you are, that Kalashich.
Ale, listen. So Geshe said later we will come to an explanation of the asuras. So asuras are the demigods being nascent in the womb. We will begin next time with an explanation of that image and what it means. So maybe it's not the most important part of this verse, but there's a nice kind of history or story that goes along with it, so we can share that. So in this way, we have at least begun our discussion of the lamp for the path, and we are also well to finishing the expressions of worship, or the praises to the various lineage teachers found in the 5th Dalai Lama's text. So really the takeaways from here that are really important are like the 3 sets of 2. So the basis, relative and ultimate truth, the path, method and wisdom, and the result, the Rupakaya, the form body, and the Dharmakaya, the truth body, as well as the inseparability of dependent arising and emptiness, and how dependent arising and emptiness underpin or inform each other. And also a deep understanding and appreciation for the nature of samsara, its lack of essence, an understanding that is deep enough to really bring forth that thought of definite emergence, sometimes translated as renunciation, which Geshe defines as the mind striving towards liberation. So when we say I'm a practitioner of Dharma, I practice, we should be practicing at minimum this path leading to liberation. Because the Dharma of liberation, that is what is going to lead us to a true and lasting mental peace and happiness. So thank you very much. We shall pause it here. Let us complete the dedications. After the dedications, if you need to get on with your, especially it being Mother's Day, if you need to get on with your day, please do. But if you'd like to stay for question and answer, feel welcome. So Geshe said also, it being Mother's Day, he wants to offer his best greetings, his tashidele, to his mother and all mothers on Mother's Day. The mother is so important, and that's expressed in the way that we talk about sentient beings. We speak about them as mother sentient beings. So great meaning behind that as well.
Changju senju rinpoche maje panan chejorji cheba nyamba meba yang gone gonda bewa resho tongni tawa rinpoche maje panan chejorji cheba nyamba meba yang gone gonda bewa resho Jambe Pao Jidar Kemba Tang Kundu Zambo Deyan Dejen Deda Kungi Jesu Dalo Chir Gewa Dida Tangje Radungo Desu Shebe Gyawa Tangje Gi Ngawa Gangla Chodo Ngaba De Dagi Gewe Tsawa Dikun Kyang Zambo Jeje Rade Ngawang.
Roger Kangi Kesa Sabi Batani Latin, Zobalenta Noda, Church Drinking over the stage, children was on the Marita Kanga.
through the merits accumulated by ourselves and others, we lament the situation of the world today in which problems and conflicts seem to be getting worse and worse, greater and greater. Through the collective merits of myself and others, may these problems, these conflicts decrease and decrease, so that the happiness and safety of sentient beings can be restored. So when we think about the conflicts that exist within this world and human beings, also non-human beings, we can see that conflicts and violence are driven by evil thoughts. Therefore, due to the merits that we have accumulated, may the evil, unwholesome thoughts of all sentient beings be diminished, and gradually may they be replaced with thoughts of loving kindness. So we'll pause there. I'm just going to turn up the volume, so give me a moment, and then we will take questions if there are any. So does somebody just want to test? I'm not sure if I'll be able to hear questions. So does someone just want to speak?
Hello, Marta.
Okay,
I
good.
see your hand is up.
Okay, good.
Go ahead.
So Marta, sorry, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Yes,
Hi there.
How are you? Okay, my question is, when a person realizes that he is on the path and aspiration at medium capacity, that he only wants his own liberation, what must be done to move to the higher path of superior capacity?
Gotcha. I understand. Yeah. So I'm just going to repeat the question, Marta, just to make sure I understood. So when a person is a person of middling capacity, he or she is striving just for their own liberation. How do they go to the next one, increase that, so that they can reach the great capacity, aspiring to free all beings? So the tambo di kebu jingi midi koronso tarpa dundunierwa gilochi kyore koronso tarpa go korde yores. Konso tarpa dondunierwa le semchen tam she giche di sangi gopang chok drubyagi dopa kandes chik kiegos.
Mita kurus marusala tesha to goyardas. Hakaso.
Yeah.
Tombo telata ni asosa no tate mevasu kudu somi sonsachi ngazo yarwas.
Los.
Ta konzo che ta ngazo loje shinyo shi o koa se ate tende karchena majana. 강에 그러지 렌드 텔레 타와스 마시나 기본에나 텔레 만두 sombalesona 다 타와 되는 걸로 생각이지.
So actually we need aspects of all three of these scopes ourselves, even if we want to practice from the great scope from the beginning. So Geshe's kind of explaining this as sort of an unfolding. So first the practitioner is going to contemplate deeply upon the suffering of the three lower realms and think that, I don't want to be reborn in these suffering states of existence, so I must be reborn in the higher realms of human and celestial beings. But then he or she realizes that actually, samsara, this is something that is in the nature of difficulty. Gonda konso korwadi kandis lagore?
So that
samsara is the nature of difficulty, it's the nature of obstacles. So if I remain within samsara, I'm actually not going to see a final end to my problems. And so then they strive towards liberation. And then also they need to develop this understanding that the creator of samsara, of this samsaric state, is ultimately karma and affliction. So because the driving force between the driving force behind samsara is karma and affliction, we understand that it's ultimately something undesirable or unwholesome, even though pleasant appearances may manifest from time to time within samsara. So one goes beyond that understanding and thinks that just as I wish for liberation from samsara, I also want that for my family. I want that for my friends. I want that freedom even for people I don't know. And finally, I want that freedom even for my enemies. And so this is how one would move through those three capacities to the Supreme. So this mind starts with a small aspiration to avoid difficulties, then to seek a permanent solution, and then becomes vaster and vaster until it encompasses all sentient beings, at which point one wishes to achieve complete enlightenment for their sake. So that's how one moves between these three. And also to say one is a practitioner of the small, middling, or great scope, one doesn't have to have actually realized those paths. One can be an ordinary being practicing the small, middling, or great scope, connected, dependent upon one's motivation for practice. It's really about how big your mindset is, how broad-minded or how vast-minded you are. That's how you determine which type of these three capacities you are.
Yeah,
so there's also that danger, right? Like, especially as we become more familiar with the teachings, we might say the words bodhicitta, love, and compassion with great skill, but what type of scope we are really in depending on our mind, right? That's something else, like what we actually may be striving towards. Was that all right, Marta? Did you get your answer somewhere in there?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, no problem. Next.
I have a question from streaming media. Question is, can Geshe please explain the difference between nirvana and parinirvana?
Yeah, nganso tarpa dang nyangen le depa gi kepar condensed chikyeres.
Mare tawa to nyangelen depa sena chipa jwa chukres. Manipi nyangelen depa sena mundawachires.
So actually we can speak of nirvana and parinirvana as being in essence the same. Where we would delineate is actually based on nirvana with remainder and nirvana without remainder.
Nyangelen depa se nyange tela nyemo tela nyange sami ta tele po depa te pomba ita.
Yeah.
Ane nyangelen depa.
So parinirvana means nyangen le de. So nyangen means the afflictions. So the Tibetan word for parinirvana is nyangen le depa. So nyange means afflictions, le depa means beyond or having abandoned. So that parinirvana is also abandonment of afflictions, in the same way nirvana or liberation is. So nyangen can also be understood as difficulties. What causes or brings difficulties? It is afflictions. So this word nyangen le depa, which is how the Tibetans translated parinirvana, this is essentially indicating a state beyond afflictions, which is also what nirvana is. When we say nirvana without remainder or parinirvana without remainder, this is the highest form of nirvana. So without remainder or non-abiding nirvana, karemepa niga. So not abiding in the cheta dang. Sita dang cheta. Yopa dang mepa.
No.
Sita kande.
Sita koita.
Ale sita dang
shita
chita sana.
shiba tawa teme ge shita
Ale. So this non. Sorry, I want to clarify something. Yabo kogimen this. Sita hakosun. Yeah. Di hakosun.
shita sena
Yeah. Cheta. Chada
shita
che.
mares
Ale.
shita shawa
Shita.
Ah,
Ale,
yeah,
shita.
yeah,
Ale.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this non-abiding nirvana is a nirvana that's not abiding in the extremes of existence or in the extremes of peace.
so jibo ge den tabi de wa to so na shita le de ta ni
Yeah. And so if one achieves nirvana for oneself alone, one is abiding within that state of peace for oneself. But the beyond that is enlightenment for all, and so that is the state where one is abiding neither in the extreme of existence, in other words samsara, or in this extreme of peace, individual peace for oneself. Nyangel de depanganso namgin di tomba chumdene michatsangwa gidunla supo di drone yang samlo tangire duas. Chichena di samlo tangire miti. Machana?
ya ta ten ho koro ni men yang le de ba koro ga zo go ma zo ra tel me chi ta yu ar ti ke cha mares ta
So I was also saying that, connected with the person's question, we also say paranirvana as a way of speaking about the passing away of the Buddha. So Geshe said that we do this out of respect, that when the Buddha manifested the passing away, we refer to it as paranirvana. But that's actually not the meaning of the word paranirvana. It's a euphemism that we use, understanding that the Buddha just manifested that aspect for our benefit.
ale ta ta chi ta de no yin ga chi
I'm saying to Geshe, I think that may have actually been, maybe, I don't know where the question is, Dave, maybe the person can clarify. That may actually have been what the person's question was.
ya ta te wo de ya ke ja te se mo yo are so ha ko sa wa pe na nga zo ta ba to cha na yo ko yi phim bo de yo na yang le de yo ma se yo are
Yeah. So it's said that even if one achieves liberation, right, liberation from the afflictions, as long as one remains in one's body that one had like prior to that realization, as long as that body remains, one has not gone into paranirvana.
ha ko sa wa
Supo di yope.
ta supo de me yo yo ne le pa pe so na ane yang le de ba me chi ta
Once that body falls away, in other words, once one falls away, there's just that liberation that is left. In a way, one is no longer held back. So we can speak of this also as paranirvana.
zo tang gi te sa so no de ti yo na de wa
But Geshe said that when he thinks about it, like he thinks it's more important to think of this paranirvana as being something which is beyond the extreme of existence within samsara, and also beyond the extreme of peace. So the paranirvana is not the most important thing, but this non-abiding nirvana, a nirvana that doesn't abide in the extreme of existence of samsara, and that also doesn't abide within the extreme of peace for oneself.
no ji pe che mo cha te le nyon de se me
Nyangde.
nyon de
Yeah.
ha ko sa nyon de se nang ta ba ngu de te zo ko ya re
So when we use the word nyangde, nirvana, it's speaking of liberation, and when we think of it in gokden, and when we think of it in terms of the formula of the Four Noble Truths, it would be pointing to true cessations, actually.
ha ko sa wa ta son ji na re ta ba to cha ge ko za ge se tu ba ni ta la yo ru ji ge nyon de se me ta ge te nyon de ni ne ma res
Younger Sundang? Rangjingin nyangde karajes?
se ge tu ba ni ta la yo
Yeah.
al ta te mo ta do
Yeah. Sorry. There's a lot to say here, but we'll end it there for now.
Yeah.
Next question.
this is ar ke je te na
Konso Tigir.
okay
I see Rudy. I think you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. Is there any room in Buddhism for creationism? I'm not thinking in the ultimate sense of emptiness or anything like that, but on some lower levels with all the universal rulers and gods and so on and so forth. Is there anything like that going on anywhere?
Yeah, like creation in terms of a being kind of creating a physical world, you mean, right?
Yeah, that's good. Yep.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Nganso chirtang nganso jigden go papo yo mares royene nganso niechardi la wang chukton den so kola chik la gire dua le la tene la dapo chik jigden soya dapo chik yorebes kongso jigden gi suk soya dan den so nupa yores nangsho nangla di yorebes.
le la te ne
Well, kongso chirtang nganso gyu thongna kongso chik so tsare sine ngone di jabula le chik yore sine samsam jiten go papo suk zambulingi suk dabochi job to get it best dabochi.
Menjite keba potandi do khawar was.
Jiten sögen labna.
Jite
Go
okay.
papa
You are
mala.
with
Jiten
it.
sögen. Yeah, you're best. Some la dabochi jiten so to get it best.
다 tani ja chembo zoto mara was. Ta ina koros ne chuji tani do koros.
So he doesn't think that you have like a creator in the sense of a world's creator, but certainly some of the gods or celestial beings within the worlds, they could perhaps create smaller realms through the power of their minds. You could see something like that.
Okay.
ganzo che towa cha so na. Da sonje do sonje samba so ya che towa cha na. Koros tamo mai bi shire. Zondo was.
Yeah, we can think about, and there's something similar to that, right? When we talk about the bodhisattvas then reaching the final enlightenment of Buddhahood, that the Buddha, each Buddha creates their own Buddha field or their own pure land. In a way, that's kind of like creating an environment or creating a place.
Yeah. I got one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How does something from nothing transition into the state of individuality? How does consciousness transition from non-existence to existence? I don't know if that's the right way to put it.
But or could we say, maybe, Rudy, how consciousness comes from being something that's completely formless into something that has form?
That sounds good, yeah.
Is that? But you mean like, or do you mean that it's not there at all and suddenly it appears? Tell me what you wanted to.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. How does it, from non-existence, from emptiness, how does it come
From
about to
emptiness,
be
okay.
individual? How does individuality appear?
Nganso chirtang nganso mi reje so sem dang kam dang mepa yores rwa. Ine nganso shepa seri di suk mepa rwa. Dene nganso tompa ni kola samlo tangna dene chikyang mepa la tene shepa chikyong yores. Dene shepa de la tene nganso mindrawa kangsak dang di jela suk yong yores. Chikyang mepa la tene tompa ni nanglo la ya di kandes chikla yores.
Chichu mepa marwas. Akoso. Tumbani sana koro zane raya mepa zo chasona. Tandriga noa ji uyar, lush tamu ji uyar was.
Yeah. So from the higher level, first we should clarify that emptiness is not nothingness, right? Emptiness is a lack of inherent existence, a lack of findability of any sort of pinpointable essence. So within that emptiness, there is space for appearance, upon which these things have been posited, but also we could say that the consciousness is very much related to the extremely subtle wind. And it's that wind and consciousness that kind of manifest together. Those sort of unfold, if you will. Dodo din so.
Maybe Chini Hakoson.
Hakoson.
I can't say.
Yeah.
Oh, that you know, Chanda was Tabochilina.
Yeah.
Chini do the man over us.
Sorry, Geshe is asking why I'm laughing. He's giving an example of sugar and water, which reminded me of something else that someone else said that made me laugh a little bit, but his example is very different. So Geshe said that you can think of this form dissolving into consciousness and becoming form as like sugar that's poured into a glass of water, right? Slowly, that sugar will dissolve, right? But the essence of that sugar is still in the water. Dene perna nima sharna. Ale, listen.
Oh, ta ka tidila. Ka tidila chini tin ped mewa ped chatwa mewa revesan mewa chama to kongamo kanzu zoto gudwa.
So at that moment that the sugar has completely dissolved into the water, right? Those particles of sugar are no longer visible to your eye consciousness. However, it doesn't mean that there's no sugar in the water at all, right? That's a little bit like the form and the consciousness rising and falling away.
하고서 다 간주 매도 대변나 잔이라야 매바 동반이 걸 저 잡을 넣었으나 저 잡을 넣었으나 이 세팅 걸 좀 매도 되어 말했어. 아빠데.
Yeah.
매도 뒤 동반이 되마도.
Ale.
이나 매도 걸어 매워 줘야 말was.
So we could also give the example of, let's think about our mind focusing on the emptiness of those flowers. At a certain point, the mind, the emptiness is where you're trying to get to. You're using the flower as like the object of that emptiness. So at a certain point, the mind is no longer resting on the flowers. It's only resting on their emptiness. But that doesn't mean that the flowers are no longer there and that they've disappeared.
하고서 니까지 매도 거럭 뚱바니에 사모지기자.
Yeah.
그 사모데 셀시하가 딜락티 사모데.
Yeah.
아니 라바데 코샤토요 말.
The thing is that the emptiness of the flower is so profound that that profundity kind of fills up the entire mind. 통반이 디 파샤네 되네 양가.
어떤 뚱바니에 그 거럭 센로야 봐 슈슈도나.
Yeah.
그래서 what 샤인 거라스.
And it fills the mind so much that the form of the flower is no longer clear. But once one lets go of the emptiness, or one puts the emptiness out of focus within the mind, that form will also become more apparent.
다 라샤야 되르지 드리우로 말와스. 배도 거 좀아서 잔이라야 매바지서.
Yeah.
다 디그 보게 세 대도년도 류지고 야래 세 대도년도 노아지고 야래. 아고서와
Yeah.
사제데 파자
But it's important to differentiate this when we speak about deity yoga in terms of arising as self-generation, arising as a deity. So here it's a little bit different. We kind of have that emptiness completely full, right? Then we imagine that from within that emptiness there is the extremely subtle wind and mind. And then we imagine that I'm going to arise that extremely subtle wind and mind, not as a contaminated, ordinary appearance, but in the uncontaminated appearance of a fully enlightened deity.
This one, se koro yuare, lu koro yuare, ta tedo nyondolo noa mombochi yuare, tumbani noa, teji kanga nyondo gotone tasla zo yuare, tetla gwakijela we kachimbochi le.
So that space of emptiness, if I could speak about it like that, where this is occurring, that extremely subtle wind, that extremely subtle mind, and that appearance are all part of, are all components of this process of arising as a deity. So in that way, it wouldn't be something from nothing.
Ndongwa kawaii na chokoro pake chala chichabala ko nyele ge yini men yoga ras. Maro solha ko gomba yina nyele ge yoga ma to ge amanes.
And in Yerling Gigu Karit,
Sertangi so was tino ta tino lu.
Nangwa
Noa do ta lu do tane ses no dol pake was.
So Sutra and Tantra speak of causes and results. We understand that if a result manifests, it has to have a nyerlengigu, a substantial cause behind it. So that's true also in our deity practice. So we could not arise as a deity in the absence of a substantial cause. So then I pushed Geshe a little bit. Well, what are those substantial cause? What is that substantial cause? And he said, well, perhaps we could say the three components, which are the appearance, the extremely subtle wind, and the extremely subtle mind.
Seti ta pake kya sunji kuzu tiga, hakatiga.
Yeah.
Hakak de nyele leji cheche siwores. Semde
Semde?
leji cheche.
Lenji sheshe.
Jinni yarwa nyele ge jedo leji cheche ge je.
Yeah. The mind itself would be an auxiliary cause of arising as that deity. And these other ones that we spoke about would be the substantial causes.
This one, ta kepa reach ge sen ta lui marwas.
Yeah.
Ane on nomba wo no ge sen tlano chuya.
And then there's discussion as to wind and appearance and whether these together are substantial causes or whether just one is. But anyways, that's a conversation for another time.
This way.
Yeah.
Ta te ka chimboro ta ga zamar tingo yo so no to kares kan.
So these are important things actually to reflect on. They are important things to think about. If you're somebody who does a sadhana, for example, right, you want to break it down and think about those things.
Oh yeah, this way.
So whoever is next, I haven't been watching, so whoever would like to go next with their question, please go ahead.
Go ahead, B.
Earlier, Geshe said that when one can perceive the two truths simultaneously, that is when we become a Buddha jewel.
Yeah.
Is that a definitive teaching all across all lineages?
Oh, okay. You want to know if this is an opinion shared by all the different lineages.
Lineages, like the Kakyu, the Nyingma, the Sakya, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Are there somebody who have a different idea about this?
Okay, sure. I can ask that, no problem. Nganso dempa ni du chik nangla tong tubya gi tutsu di nganso sangye konchok togire dus dabo chik labswa. Nganso sangye gi konchok chaya gi tutsu di dempa ni nyamdu tong tubya la tene yongires labya di kaju yena ningma yena sakya yena geluk yena su yena chikpares koronso samlo tangtang mandrawa yeres.
Yeah, that's right.
Geshe hesitates to answer definitively because he hasn't, he doesn't have so much experience of every single tradition. But his guess would be, his feeling would be that this is an agreed upon thing. But he thinks there may be certain proponents of certain schools who think that, like, once ultimate truth is realized, that relative or conventional truth is no longer findable. So if he's correct in thinking that some hold that view, then perhaps yes, perhaps those people would disagree with this presentation, but he's not sure. He's not familiar enough to answer definitively. Because his feeling is there might be some people that are holding that the only thing that's kind of real is ultimate truth, and then this case of like having to see ultimate and relative truth together wouldn't be such an important thing. Because perhaps they're holding that all relative truths are in a certain way mistaken appearance, and then if relative truth is completely understood as a mistaken appearance, then why would perceiving relative and ultimate truth simultaneously help you achieve the Buddha jewel? So he's not sure if there's still some people believing that, but if there are, perhaps you'd have a problem here with saying everyone accepts it. So some people might say, okay, but like there are relative truths, like all of us are here as human beings kind of functioning in our daily life. But they would say, yes, that's relative truth, but on that level it's actually a mistaken appearance because it is not what is ultimate. So there may be some people that hold that. Yeah. So they would say that the best mind is the mind that unequivocally realizes the true nature of things, the way things really are, which is ultimate truth. At that point, perhaps relative truth completely falls away. Then, if somebody's holding that, you might find them arguing against this teaching. Yeah. It's a little bit like the example Geshe gave with the flower and the flower's emptiness. At a certain point, the emptiness is completely filling the mind, and you only see the emptiness, you no longer see the flower. So maybe it's a little bit like that. But once again, he doesn't have enough experience to say that definitively, but if there's an objection, that perhaps would be it.
But
what we would say in our understanding, right, is that like, yeah, you're focused on the emptiness of the flower, and when you're in single-pointed concentration on that emptiness completely fills your mind. But that doesn't mean that the relative aspect, that physical flower, is no longer there. Right? We would say that doesn't make sense.
Is there a difference to say conventional truth versus conventional existence?
Nganso kunzop dempa dang kunzop sipa yang mena kunzop yupa kunzop dempa dang kunzop yupa dun chikrebes.
Temardas. Kuzu to yoba jalabagina. That is the sivar.
So conventional existence or relative existence, no, it's not the same as conventional or relative truth, because emptiness has relative existence actually. Anything that is existent or present, even nominally, this is relatively existent, including emptiness. So we would say that emptiness is relatively existent, but it is not relative truth. That would be the answer to your question in a nutshell.
So from the perspective of a Buddha, does a Buddha has two truths, or just one truth?
Dene sangye gi tongtang yena koron so kunzop dempa dang dundam dempa ni tongyeres konso dempa chik mato tongyomares. Yes, they actually they see it at the same time, but there still is both relative and ultimate truth for a Buddha. Because the relative and the ultimate truth are different aspects of the same object. So they're just seeing both those objects, both those aspects for any given object.
Well, the Buddha would be able to see the conventional, the relative existence of, say, like the Buddha, the Pure Land. And then the Pure Land is empty. So that's the two truths.
Sorry. Can you say again?
As an example,
Yeah.
from the perspective of the Buddha seeing things, he's able to see the relative existence of the Pure Land, his own Pure Land, and
Yeah.
other Buddha's Pure Land. But at the same time, that Pure Land, he also see the emptiness of the Pure Land. So that's the two truth.
Yeah.
So is that considered two truth? Because he's seeing the relative existence of the Pure Land without the veil of ignorance.
Yeah. Okay. Sangye gi dagshin tongna ngansu sukavati dewachen tongna roa ko kunzop gi dewachen tongiyores ko dundam gi dewachen tongiyores. Ine kunzop gi dewachen tongdu di netsu tartu daporebes karinsena kunzop dempa yina yang marigpa gi june tongyomares.
대토게 대화지에서야지 매매 대토게 대화지에서 요마르와스 대화지에는 그도 대화이 비चा르와스.
So this example Geshe feels doesn't work because Sukhavati or Dewachen, Amitabha's Pure Land, is not an ultimate truth. It's a relative truth. So its aspect of emptiness, right? Because like every phenomena has an aspect of emptiness. So that is ultimate truth. But you couldn't really speak of Sukhavati, of Dewachen, as being an ultimate truth because it's a relative truth.
Because it relatively exists.
Yes, exactly. Kunzop drupayin sang, kunzop dempares.
That's why I was asking earlier. For something to be relatively exist, it doesn't mean that that thing is a relative truth.
Dene okay, so dene nganso kunzop du yopayena roa kunzop dempa yengomares. Yes, correct.
So we can the example given is emptiness. Emptiness relatively exists, but it is an ultimate truth.
Tompani seria di ko kunzop du yopayores yene ko dundam dempares. Correct. Yes.
So if I were to take another example, the Buddha's Pure Land or the Buddha's body, then the relative existence of that, if we say that it is a relative truth, it means the definition of a relative truth is that it is seen through a veil of ignorance. It's true for the concealer. So, but there's no concealer in the Buddha.
Okay, sangegi kusuk tongna rwa dene nganso kunzop dempa gi tseni drona kunzop dempa gi tseni nganso maripa gi gyune chik tongo gire duas yine sangegi ngene rwa maripa metsang dene kunzop dempa yomares kuntu yopa gi supo yoma
maybe
res.
kazo damba tan mari bijin thok mar was
Ale.
ngaro sore ma to
So we as ordinary beings see relative truth through this veil of ignorance. But other beings don't see relative truth through a veil of ignorance.
sonji ga ngia so thongare nyawar je thogare ngaro koi nyo dar je thongare kanga
The Buddha has a direct perception and understanding of all of these appearances of relative phenomena. For example, the lower realms, the higher realms, the hell realms, the beings within, and all of those. So those are still relative truths. Doesn't stop being a relative truth because he doesn't see it through the veil of ignorance.
당에 내서 가래 이나 이마 때 가로 통거라 와 가까야 그럼 도 있지
He is able to see all of those things without a veil of ignorance and to see them in an unmistaken way. But that doesn't mean that they're no longer relative.
It is relative, but in what way would it be a relative truth to the Buddha?
Yeah, Geshe said that he can't. He's not sure if he can continue because we're gonna go around in circles here. But he said we have to do this on the debating yard. Kunzo di datum kunzo dempa res yune kunzo pioma res karensana kunzo maripa gi june di tongyo.
그것도 요는 일라서 말이 bijin ke 그거 말해 내가 내서야
What he would leave you with, and think about this and then maybe come back, is that you don't have to see something through a veil of ignorance in order for it to be a relative truth, right? That's our experience as ordinary beings, but it's not a universal definition.
Okay, that is one way out of this thing here, but that would contradict the definition of a relative truth.
Ine kunzop dempa gi tseni roa maripa gi gyune tongye
말을
res.
대인님이 그 말, 다시야.
That's
또 덴바스는 가르세그래 그도 세한테
Yeah.
말이 빨라져. 디고가 되었지.
that's the meaning generality. When you give the definition according to the meaning generality, yes, you're correct. That is the definition. But this definition is not universal in that it's applied to what a Buddha sees when they see relative truth.
그도 다시에 그래 돌아라야 돼. 말이 비긴데
You're correct. If we give a sound generality as a way of giving a meaning definition of relative truth, you're absolutely right. But this doesn't hold in the case of what a Buddha is seeing.
Okay, I'll follow it up next time. I think we've gotten too long on this. Thank you so very much.
He says your definition is not incorrect. You're correct with your definition, but it's just not necessarily universally applicable. That's what he's saying.
Aha, they should have said that in the definition.
Yeah. Well, hindsight is always 20/20, right? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Do we have? You're welcome. You're welcome. Do we have any? Yeah, but Geshe said you're absolutely like you've learned it correctly. That is often the definition that's given. So he's not saying you're mistaken, but it just maybe can't be applied across the board. Any other questions before we let folks go? All right, well, if there's nothing else, I want to wish all mothers happy Mother's Day and all of you a happy day generally. So take care, everybody.
야, 그 제가 다시 될래.
Thanks so much.